Well, welcome everybody to, we like to say, the final special event of the 161st anniversary festivities. And I'm going to do a little talk on the Confederate Retreat from Gettysburg. And you probably remember last week or a week or so ago, we did the Union Advance. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that happened after the battle on the Confederate Retreat from Gettysburg as it pertains to Adams County. So I'm not going to talk about the entire retreat in this program. Oh, my name is Tim Smith, and I'm the historian here at the Adams County Historical Society. And I guess I am a licensed battlefield guide still. I don't really do too many tours anymore, but I've been a guide for over 30 years and, taken thousands of people around the battlefield. And, almost every individual that goes on a tour has heard of Robert E. Lee. But I was always stunned by the number of people who had never heard of General George Gordon Meade or his association with the battle. And if somebody does know about him, half the people know that he was fired after the battle because his failure to pursue the Southern Army and, eventually replaced by Ulysses S. Grant, which of course is not true. General Meade took command 3 days before the battle, and he commanded the Army of the Potomac till the very end of the war and was, in charge of the celebration parade in Washington, D.C. afterwards. It's just Grant was made overall commander of all Northern armies. And, today's program is really not about General Meade, or I'm not really going to spend too much time defending General Meade's, efforts to halt the Southern Army in a retreat. I just think there's some interesting facets of it when it comes to, General Meade and General Lee. First of all, I would like to say that, General Lee did a very good job in orchestrating the Southern withdrawal from Gettysburg. And of course, General Meade only had his job for 3 days. And what I really always am taken by when we talk about the retreat after the Battle of Gettysburg is the fact that General Meade was the first man to ever soundly defeat Robert E. Lee in battle. And then, we're critical of him because he doesn't immediately destroy Lee's army and force Lee to surrender. I don't even know how such a thing is even possible. But when you read accounts or books, so many of them make it sound like all General Meade has to do is just counterattack or pursue, and the Southern Army would collapse and surrender. And, if you think that's possible, maybe we should ask General Grant why it took him a whole year to force Lee to surrender, from 1864 to 1865, when he attacked him in Virginia with overwhelming numbers. But, the other thing about it is, after the Battle of Gettysburg is over, it's pretty apparent that Lee knows he's going to retreat, and Lee pulls together his orders and issues orders for the retreat, and although there were some glitches, orchestrated the retreat pretty well. General Meade, on the other hand, doesn't really know at first exactly what Lee's intentions are. He doesn't know if Lee's just pulling back to the South Mountain Range to regroup in the mountain gaps and, put up some sort of defense. He doesn't know that if he marches away from Gettysburg, if Lee will not march back to the battlefield. And, it's interesting, a lot of people over the years have suggested that as soon as Meade determined that Lee was retreating, the proper course of action would be for him to immediately march south and then cross the mountain range near Frederick, the Catoctons and South Mountain Range, and cut off Lee's route of retreat. And, there's this unspoken rule in war that people seem to want to ignore here, that whoever maintains control of the battlefield after the battle is the winner of the battlefield. You have to stay on the battlefield until the other person retreats. I mean, how do we tell who wins the battle and who doesn't in the Civil War? Did you ever think about that? People ask me that all the time. How do you figure out who wins? There's like a judge that says, okay, winner. No, in the Civil War, the person who loses is the person who leaves first. That's how you determine it. Sometimes the winner loses more men than the loser. And so, you have to remain at Gettysburg until you're sure that Lee is retreating. And, we just kind of take that for granted sometimes. I could go on and on and on about the differences between Meade and Lee. One thing's interesting, I also think about, is in the early stages of the retreat that we're going to talk about here, I'm going to be very critical of General Sedgwick and General Warren. And it's interesting when we read about the Army, if subordinates of General Meade make mistakes, it's Meade's fault. In Lee's Army, it's never Lee's fault. It's Longstreet's fault. He should have attacked earlier in the day. It's Heath's fault. He shouldn't have brought on the battle so early. It's Jeb Stuart's fault for not being here. It's never Lee's fault. Why is it always Meade's fault? So I just find those things interesting. And again, that's not really the purpose of our program, even though I talked about it there. So on the evening of July 3rd, it was clear to Robert E. Lee that he had lost the battle. And on July 7th, when he gets to Hagerstown, he writes to Jefferson Davis, "My letter of the 4th instant will have informed you of the unsuccessful issue of our final attack on the enemy in rear of Gettysburg. Finding the position too strong to be carried, and being much hindered in collecting necessary supplies for the Army, but the numerous bodies of local and other troops which watch the passes, I determined to withdraw to the west side of the mountains." In his official report of the battle, written on July 31st, he wrote, "Owing to the strength of the enemy's position and the reduction of our ammunition, a renewal of the engagement could not be hazarded, and the difficulty of procuring supplies rendered it impossible to continue longer where we were." And after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee figures they have enough artillery ammunition and infantry ammunition for one major battle. But they can gather supplies and provisions, they can gather food for the Army, they can maybe even supply them with other things, but where are they going to get ammunition if they run out of ammunition? So he has to retreat. On the evening of July 3rd, there is a meeting with at A.P. Hill's headquarters where he talks about the fact that they're going to have to retreat. And I think at the meeting, you might read that some of his officers who were there thought that they were just retreating to the South Mountain Range at first and are going to try to make a stand there or draw the Northern Army into a battle. Similar to Lee's plan prior to the battle, to fight with his back to the mountain range, and if something happens, he can just retreat over the mountains and back down to Virginia. After that meeting, he returned to his headquarters on the Chambersburg Pike, and that's where he met with General John Imboden. And he ordered Imboden's command to gather up as many as the wounded as they could and gather wagons and carriages wherever they could find them. And luckily, Jeb Stuart had captured a bunch of wagons in Rockville, put wounded soldiers in them, and he was going to send Imboden ahead of the retreat. He also prepared very detailed, specific instructions for the various elements of his army to retreat. And for the most part, the Southern Army would retreat through the Fairfield area and through Monterey Pass, the shortest distance to the Potomac River. Depending on, how you go, it's like 40 miles from Gettysburg to the Potomac River, over the mountains through Fairfield and to Hagerstown and down. And Bowdoin would have to go a little bit farther because he'd use the Cashtown Pass. So in his wagon train. But I'm not going to get too much into this part of the retreat, but John Bowdoin is in charge of the wagon train of wounded. He writes an extensive article about it, which appeared in Century Magazine, and you can read it today, in Battles and Leaders of the Civil War, in which they gather together something like 8,000 wounded soldiers, put them in wagons, and they go through the Cashtown Pass over the mountains and then turn and go out towards Marion and then down through Greencastle and Hagerstown and down towards the river. There's all kinds of interesting tidbits in his account. For instance, the wagon train ends up being 17 miles long. I think he says it takes like 32 hours to pass any single spot. It's just an immense wagon train. And that's the one that you generally hear about when we talk about the Confederate retreat from Gettysburg. And there are some small engagements with some Union cavalry that are Bowdoin faces on his way. But pretty much they get to Williamsport, to the Potomac River in a timely fashion. Now, the rest of the army will basically retreat out through various roads towards Fairfield and then out a Fairfield road over the South Mountains. And the area we're talking about in our discussion today is this area in southwestern Adams County between Gettysburg and Fairfield and Monterey Pass. Here's the 1858 Adams County wall map, and I just blew it up a little bit there so you could see what we're talking about. And if we subtract the southern losses at Gettysburg, let's say they have, they sent the wounded in a different direction. So we're probably talking about like 35 or 40,000 men that we're talking about will retreat through this area, through the Adams County countryside. One thing I think is fascinating, I should mention here, is that the retreating column of the Southern Army is very long. And when you read books about the retreat from Gettysburg, you must consider that there are actions and fighting at the head of the Confederate retreating column, and there are actions and there's fighting at the rear of the Confederate column at different points during the retreat. The entire retreat I'm talking about. But in Adams County, it's the same. So I should mention, let's see, what's my next slide? Okay, not yet. So I should mention that there is fighting and skirmishing all day long on July 4th. On the morning of July 4th, the Southern Army pulled their forces back to Seminary Ridge, and they leave the town of Gettysburg, and actually their line of battle runs out here behind the building and apparently ends up here somewhere behind us, and they sort of dig in. And, I would say this, if you would like to be critical of General Meade for things he does during the Gettysburg campaign, probably you could be critical of him for not counterattacking on July 4th. Now, I know he's got to cross an open field, and the Confederates have lots of canister rounds they haven't used yet. So there would be some casualties inflicted upon a northern charge across that open field if you would make a reverse Pickett's charge. But General Meade has the 6th Army Corps that had arrived on the evening of July 2nd, and on July 3rd were only partly engaged, so you could throw the 6th Army Corps across the field at the Southern Army. And, General Meade does not do that. So, like I say, if you wanted something to be critical of him for, I guess you could do it there. Of course, what might have happened, it might have just added more casualties to the Battle of Gettysburg's total. And it's already the bloodiest battle in American history. If someone on my tour just asks me if they're being too critical of General Meade in his actions immediately after the battle, in his defense, I would usually say, well, General Meade only had his command of his troops for 3 days, and he had just lost more men than any other American army had ever lost in any battle in any war, and he was the winner. So, I might say something, dramatic like that, just to appease the people. But usually it doesn't work. If they're going to be critical, well, he should have ended the war. He could have just stopped him. And then, the other thing that maybe I'm famous for saying is that the major reason why General Meade does not bring the Southern Army to battle after Gettysburg, after the fighting, is because Lee does not want to engage in battle, and Lee does not want to surrender. So Lee's gone. And, again, Lee does an awesome job during the retreat, I would say. Okay. So all day long on the 4th, they stay here. Now, the other thing we need to mention here is the weather. It didn't really rain at all during the battle. There's some accounts where there's a brief shower, isolated shower on the morning of July 1st, south of town, but apparently not on the battlefield. But on July 4th, the rain started at 6 a.m. And from about 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on July 4th, it was a heavy, heavy downpour. And that night, it rained again. And on the night of the 4th into the 5th, it was a lightning and thunderstorm. And then it rained on and off for the next several days afterwards. But in the rain, on the evening of July 4th, by cover of darkness, the Southern Army began to slip away from Seminary Ridge in the direction of Hagerstown. Along with Imboden sending wounded over the Cashtown Pass, wounded in the hospitals out along the Fairfield Road and in the area of the Cashtown, wounded were gathered up in the wagons. And along with a lot of the supplies that they captured during the Pennsylvania invasion, there was a wagon train sent ahead of the army down through Fairfield and up and over the pass. So we generally refer to it as Ewell's wagon train because a lot of the wounded soldiers and the men in charge of the wagon train were from Richard Ewell's corps, but they were sent ahead. And then A.P. Hill's men marched out towards the mountain range through Fairfield, and they were followed by Longstreet and Ewell. To put it mildly, Sedgwick and Warren do not do a very good job of determining the situation in the Confederate retreat. As a matter of fact, on July 5th, they do not engage the Southerners while they're still here in Gettysburg as they're starting out. They allow them to march out the Fairfield Road, and then they follow them somewhat gingerly at a distance. They throw out lines of battle on both sides of the road and slowly march out. On the evening of the 5th, they finally catch up to the rear guard, and there's a skirmish out along the Fairfield Road we're going to talk about. And then they basically allow the Southern Army to retreat through Fairfield. Warren goes back, announces that they believe Lee's force is fortifying the gap, and so Meade calls a halt to some of his army marching towards Frederick to get, try to outflank Lee's army. He stops. He has the 1st Corps and the 5th Corps near Emmitsburg to support the 6th Corps, and then he orders them on the night of the 5th, on the morning of the 6th, to attack the rear of Lee's army at the Gap and try to determine if they're actually making a stand in the Gap. And if the 6th Corps gets in trouble, he's going to send over the 1st Corps, the 5th Corps from Emmitsburg to assist him. And again, maybe about midday on the 6th, Sedgwick starts pushing a couple regiments towards the Gap, and there's a brief firefight, and they determine that the Southerners are moving on. And it just seems to me that Sedgwick doesn't effectively or even remotely attack the Lee's rear. And there's other considerations here. Now you could say Meade should have just said, attack, put your men in line of battle and attack. I think he relied upon Sedgwick and General Warren's judgment a little too much. I guess he had confidence in them. It would not be the first time that General Warren would let Meade down. You probably know all about the Mine Run campaign. And then, of course, Grant gets really angry at Warren at Spotsylvania. Warren has a propensity to call off the attack, and Grant didn't appreciate that. And in Warren's defense, a couple times later, he calls off the attack because he's afraid that too many men are going to die in a needless charge. But it's hard to just not place blame on these guys for not. Meade is waiting to learn if Lee is really retreating before he starts a general movement of the army south and over the mountains to Frederick. One thing you got to keep in mind is the mountain gap. You can't chase Lee's army because they could hold you back with just a few men. You got to swing around and get into their rear. Other people have been critical of Meade, and this is, again, a legitimate criticism. If he would have understood on July 4th that the Southern Army were going to retreat in the area of Fairfield, and maybe he could have sent some infantry over to Emmitsburg then to get in position to attack Fairfield when the Southern Army were retreating through it. But again, Connington brings that up in his excellent book on the Gettysburg campaign, but that's using hindsight, of course. So I'm going to show you some pictures of the Fairfield Road. And this is an image from an early tour guide book, which was very popular around 1900s. I think this image might be from like 1904, but we're on Seminary Ridge at the light there, and I'm sure next time you're stopped at that light on Seminary Ridge Avenue for 5 minutes, look to your right and you can get to this view looking down the road past the YWCA. But that's the Fairfield Road from Seminary Ridge, and I think it's an interesting view of it. Now again, the Hagerstown Pike is the direct road to over the mountains to Waynesboro and then down through Hagerstown and to the Potomac River. And the road was laid out in 1747. It's the Marsh Creek Road, one of the earliest roads that leads through this area. And not far down the Fairfield Road, you come to the area of Marsh Creek and Black Horse Tavern. This is an interesting photograph from the 1890s. We're on top of Bream's Hill. And this is often, seen in books. We have a really nice copy of it. We got it from the original glass plate negative when Sue Boardman owned it. I think she sold it. I don't know who owns her negatives now. And you can see some horses, the horse droppings there. But there's the stone bridge over Marsh Creek, and that's Black Horse Tavern and the barn. And we're on the original road. So I don't know if you ever ride out towards Black Horse Tavern when you go by the Gettysburg Times building on your left. And then as you drive out, there's a road that goes off to the right and up to the top of the hill. I think it's called Breams Hill Road. And that's the original road. Obviously, at some point, I'm guessing in the 1940s, they put a cut through Breams Hill, and today we just drive straight through it. But at that time, you had to go up and over it and around. And so this is a great view that William Tipton recorded looking down towards the bridge in the tavern. Now, Black Horse Tavern was owned by one of the early Scotch-Irish families of this area, the McClellan family. The log tavern there at that site predates the American Revolution. We don't have really good records of taverns while this was York County early on. So it's probably a tavern in the 1760s, maybe the 1740s. And of course, the McClellans were well known for their tavern operations. In the 1840s, when the McClellan who ran this tavern died, his sons came to Gettysburg and opened up the McClellan House on the square of Gettysburg, which of course today is the Hotel Gettysburg. And that, that was called the McClellan House at the time of the battle. But this is their original tavern, and then the stone part of the tavern, which I didn't write down here. I think it dates from the 1790s, if I'm not mistaken. But this part of the building no longer stands. This is like an 1870s image of the property, and this is gone. There's just grass here at the moment. And this part of the tavern still stands. The tavern was owned for many years by Francis Bream, and that's why it's called, the Bream's Tavern at the time, or Black Horse Tavern. And this is actually the site of General Buford's skirmish line on June 30th, the left end of a skirmish line. It's right near Marsh Creek. It was the scene of heavy activity on July 3rd and July 4th. The buildings were used as a hospital during and after the battle. After the Southern retreat, and they took a lot of wounded soldiers in wagons. According to the sergeant from South Carolina that was left behind, I think he said there were 220 wounded soldiers left in the house and barn. And we have J.W.C. O'Neill's burial registers, and I think he has listed a total of 46 bodies that were buried around the house and barn, Southern soldiers, after the battle. So there's burials there are well documented. And on July 4th, this was sort of a congregating point for Confederate officers during the early stages of the retreat. And there's a great account that Robert E. Lee is here in front of the tavern greeting the officers of his various commands as they came by and they were directing elements of the retreat. And it's a really good place for that because right beside the tavern, of course, is Black Horse Tavern Road, and it goes up over to Knoxland Road, which goes over to Route 30. And, of course, if you go to the tavern and make a left, that road leads out over the area to Sachs Bridge, where Southerners were retreating in that direction from the extended line on the evening of July 4th. But on July 4th, we have an account by Fitzgerald Ross. He is the Prussian observer who, along, with Arthur Fremantle, the English observer, is one of the people who are there with the Southern Army. And he writes that on July 4th, Bream's Tavern His house and his stable, barn, and every outbuilding were filled with wounded men, some of whom were being moved into ambulances, and others more badly wounded were being removed to better accommodations left thereby vacant. It was a grievous sight to see these fine young fellows, many of them probably crippled for life. Many were to be left behind, too severely wounded to bear removal. For a time, in the yard in front of Bream's Tavern seemed a regular rendezvous for generals and their staff officers, and all who passed stopped on their way and entered into conversation. Here, I met General Jeb Stewart for the first time and was introduced to him and many other generals too numerous to name. So we have a good account that talks about that. Now it was on the 4th. So on the 5th, I mentioned about noon, the rear of the Confederate retreating column leaves Gettysburg and starts down the Fairfield Road and eventually passes this tavern. And like I said, there's, I think it was in Civil War Times Illustrated years and years ago, there's a great article about the Simon Baruch, I think his name is, that's a surgeon with South Carolina who's left in charge of the wounded here. And eventually, the Union Army pushes out the Fairfield Road and passes the tavern. And according to a man in Torbert's brigade, the New Jersey Brigade of the 6th Army Corps of Wright's Division is in the lead of the 6th Corps as they push out. And there's a letter from the 15th New Jersey. It's actually in the Hunterdon, New Jersey newspaper. I forget which name of the paper is. I didn't write it down. But he says, we passed large camps of wounded rebels that were left behind by them, and every house and barn for miles around were used as hospitals, so that several thousand prisoners were no doubt left in our hands without a struggle. And according to the official report of General John Sedgwick, he claims that 250 prisoners were captured on that day. So not a couple thousand, but it depends how you count wounded soldiers that you're gobbling up as you go along. And whenever next time you're taking a ride from Gettysburg to Fairfield, as you go out towards Black Horse Tavern and then over Marsh Creek and beyond it, take a look at some of those really nice hospital plaques that were placed by the Pennsylvania Hospital Association in the 1980s. And you'll see plaques at like the John Byers House and the Jacob Plank House and Andrew Weikert's house, which of course today is Weikert's Egg Farm, if you know Mr. Weikert. But all these farms along there were filled with wounded soldiers that were being gathered up as the Southern Army marched out, undoubtedly slowing Sedgwick's advance down. One thing I'm surprised about is Sedgwick's men, and again we're talking to New Jersey troops, seemed to form a line of battle on both sides of the road and move out the road with skirmishers and a line of battle on either side, climbing over the fences and going over the hills and through the fields in a very slow, deliberate march. And this is one of the things that slowed down General Heath's advance after they met General Buford's skirmishers on July 1st. Why don't you just stay, let your cavalry advance skirmish with the enemy, and you stay in line of battle on the road until you need, or columns of four, until you need to throw it into a line of battle. But they slowly marched out the road. According to General Torbert, I don't want to get into that yet. Let me show you these photographs. So we have the bridge. I have a picture of the bridge over Marsh Creek. And just to give you an idea what it looks like, I think I have an account of it in my roads show. I think it's built in like 1808, this particular stone arch bridge. And so, and it's not much different than the one that's over the Chambersburg Pike, but I think it has an extra arch as opposed to the one on the Chambers, maybe the two smaller arches, and maybe that's a 3 arch and this is a 5 arch bridge. But that bridge stood until it was replaced, maybe in the 1930s. Here's about a 1900 image of the bridge, and we're looking back towards Gettysburg, and you can see the side of the Black Horse Tavern. And again, a nice image of the road they retreated on. Now, on this map, this is the 1858 Adams County wall map. You'll see Hamilton Bond Township. I wanted to mention that Highland Township is founded in like 1864. So it's not on this map, but Highland is right here. And, Freedom. And we're talking about the Fairfield Road is right here, and here's the area of the Black Horse Tavern. There's the bridge, and then we're talking about this area that leads down towards Fairfield. And a couple of things I want to point out along the route here. Here is the 1872 Adams County Atlas of Highland Township. So here's where the tavern is and the bridge is over Marsh Creek. And of course, we're talking about the Fairfield Road. And you can see here the Lower Marsh Creek Presbyterian Church that I saw a couple members from that church here. But there's that right there. And there's a couple interesting farms. We mentioned Andrew Weichert. Isn't it interesting the Weicherts have lived in that same place for a long time? So you go visit them and buy eggs from them and talk to them. And then once you go up and over the hill, Noor Road would kick off somewhere in here. There's a driveway leading back down a hill across the stream, and there's a really nice stone house. Here it's shown as David Stewart, but that is the, let me go back one, I forget, that's the Douglas. William Douglas at the time of the battle, right there, that nice old stone house. And then, of course, here you have Knoxon Road, and I don't know, one of them's Camp Gettysburg Road, and it's Weichert Road? I think so. But once you get past that, then we're passing the David Stewart Farm. And that right there, of course, is the farm lane leading today into Granite Hill Campground. The area is not historically known as Granite Hill. Granite Hill Post Office is actually on Route 30 East at the time of the Civil War, and it's where Granite Hill Post Office was near the Adams County Mission. So, and just if you make a left there at the Mission, you go onto the road towards Hunterstown, then there's right where the railroad tracks cross, that's Granite Station. But Granite Hill, for whatever reason, the campground, I should ask somebody, why do they call it Granite Hill Campground if there's no such place as Granite Hill? Maybe it's just because it's got lots of rocks. But there is somewhat of a skirmish. I'd like to call it a battle. The Battle of Granite Hill Campground, maybe. But I don't know how many casualties you have to call something a battle. So the advance of the 6th Army Corps catches up somewhere around here to the rear guard of Juba Early's Confederate division. So Juba Early's division is in the rear. John B. Gordon's brigade is in the rear of the infantry, and behind them is the 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry under Colonel Elijah White. And the New Jersey troops catch up to the rear guard because there is a bottleneck we're going to talk about in a moment at Fairfield. And they have to send back the 26th Georgia of Gordon's brigade, and the 26th Georgia and the New Jersey troops, probably elements of the 3rd New Jersey and 15th New Jersey of Torbert's brigade actually engage in fighting somewhere in here. Now, whether the fighting is here, up here on top of the rise of ground where there's woods, or down along here, that's a matter of debate. I'd imagine some people who have metal detectors probably would have a better idea than I would of maybe where this fight took place. But I generally refer to it as the skirmish at David Stewart's farm. And I know that other people have called it the Battle of Granite Hill. But again, that's a modern name, not a historic name. So this fight here is almost forgotten about today. In the official report of General Torbert, he says, "We came up upon their rear guard about 2 miles from Fairfield and had a sharp skirmish. About 5 p.m., we drove the enemy to Fairfield, and at night fell back about 1.5 miles. Loss of the enemy, 2 killed. 2 officers and 4 privates taken prisoner. Our loss, 1 killed and 2 wounded." The 26th Georgia Regiment that was involved in this fight claims to have lost 11 men wounded or missing. The only man who's listed as being killed during this battle by the Union Army is a guy in the 3rd New Jersey, Corporal Daniel Shue, who now rests in the Soldiers National Cemetery, Gettysburg, and was temporarily buried near the spot where he fell, according to the account. One of the Southerners taken prisoner was Lieutenant Charles L. Walker of Company F, 26 Georgia. He was taken to Gettysburg, where he died at Camp Letterman General Hospital on September 4th, 1863. His remains in 1871 were removed, and he's buried today in Laurel Grove Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. So if you get to Savannah, it's one thing I had to do is go to that cemetery and see if I could find his grave, which I did. It was really fascinating. So we actually have a couple people that are, die as a result of this battle. According to an account by Lucius Voorhees of Company A, 15th North Carolina, and I got this out of the New Jersey newspaper on July 17th, 1863. I was in New Jersey, and my wife was doing some genealogy, and so I was looking for Civil War Gettysburg letters in their newspaper. "In line of battle, we tramped over many fields, laying grain low and tearing down fences till entering a woods, when the skirmishers became hotly, actively engaged, and we laid down, the bullets whizzing past us. Our skirmishers falling back, the Rebs pursued, but coming in sight of our battle line, they fell back hurriedly, leaving a lieutenant wounded on the ground. Our loss, 1 killed, a corporal in the 3rd Regiment. At night, we returned to the woods and bivouacked, arising early the next morning, and then moving on." Let's see. And we do have a really nice account, lengthy account, I won't read it, by the 15th New Jersey, that talks about going up and over a rise of ground through the woods. And that's kind of why we tend to believe this battle occurred on the western edge of what is now Granite Hill Campground, and then down through the woods towards Fairfield. Fascinating. And we actually have an account, I should mention, from a man in the 26th Georgia that also describes the fighting. After the fighting was over, General Sedgwick sent forward an artillery piece, and the artillery piece took position on a rise of ground out here. Let me see if I have a better view of it. I do. A rise of ground known by the name Sugarloaf on the 1858 map. And, I like to imagine where this is. Whenever I ride to Fairfield, these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. What happened during the retreat, who was where. And so I love this particular map here. This is the 1858 wall map. And this is Cold Springs Road. if you know where Cold Springs Road is. So right here where the Topper Farm is located, that's, I forget the name of it, but that's a repair shop, mechanic repair shop. And then there's a rise of ground you can look off to right and see here. Now there's woods here today, but it's that rise of ground, I believe, that Harn's battery is placed upon after the 6 Corps advance pushes by it. I'm imagining that they come out Cold Springs Road and then onto this little rise of ground, and they start lobbing artillery shells towards Fairfield, specifically at a traffic jam on this intersection, which is just fascinating to me. Let's see. Oh, yeah. According to Captain William Harns, I think I got a picture of it. Not yet. Oh, there it is. And to give you an idea, Harn's battery is a 6 Corps artillery brigade battery whose monument is at the edge of the Soldiers National Cemetery on the Taneytown Road. Have you seen that? That's where the tour guides used to park when we worked out of the visitor center there. We call it the Dust Bowl, that parking lot. But that's the monument. So some of the monuments on the battlefield, are represented but weren't active during the battle. This, was active during the retreat. And according to that account, the battery moved quickly to the front, took position on the heights overlooking the town of Fairfield, and opened fire on the enemy, driving him from his position. So I find that interesting. This is a map of this action drawn by one of the licensed battlefield guides, Dave Weaver, for one of our seminars. Dave, he's a great guy. He always talked about how he liked really simple maps. So here he's showing you Harn's battery firing at this intersection. And this, of course, is tracked road, Carroll's tracked road, and this is the Fairfield road that come together just outside the village of Fairfield. And what's going on here is there is a huge traffic jam because we're not retreating, the Southerners are not retreating over the Cashtown Gap. All the wounded and the wagons that were in the area of Cashtown on Route 30 behind the Southern lines are going to Cashtown and then going down the tracked road through what is now Ortana on their way to Fairfield, and then are joining the other parts of the column and they're retreating through the town. And this is causing a traffic jam that caused Gordon's brigade to send back a regiment to hold back the New Jersey troops. And now, after that short fight, Harn's battery is lobbing artillery shells into the rear of the Confederate column. Let's see. According to General Juber Early, I love his account. He's got a great autobiography. On arriving in sight of Fairfield, which is situated near the eastern base of the South Mountains. I think I have there he is. I'm sorry. So there he is, and this is the intersection we're talking about. Okay. Which is located on the eastern base of the South Mountain Range on a wide, low plain or valley surrounded by commanding hills. I found the wagon trains blocked up the village. While waiting for the road to be cleared of the wagons in front, Colonel White, Elijah White of the 35th Virginia Battalion, sent me information that a force of the enemy was advancing in my rear, and being on the plain where I'd be exposed to a fire of artillery from the surrounding hills, I sent to hasten forward the trains. But as they did not move off, I was preparing to fire a blank cartridge or two for the purpose of quickening their speed. When the advance of the pursuing column of the enemy appeared on a hill in my rear with a battery of artillery supported by infantry, and I opened with shell on it. He actually brought up the Louisiana battery. I think it's Charles Green's Lieutenant Louisiana Guard artillery, and he started firing shells at this artillery piece. But the enemy battery soon replied to mine, and Fairfield was soon cleared of wagons, as the teamsters and the wagon masters found it more convenient to comply with this inducement to travel than my orders. He's just got such a great way with words. So there's this little battle around the edge of Fairfield here on, the 5th. So we got the David Stewart farm engagement and this little engagement at the edge of Fairfield. Now, 2 stories about this that I have to tell. One of them is the Gelback farm. And here's Joseph Gelback. And I don't know if anybody's familiar. Again, I ride here all the time. This is called Muddy Run or Muddy Branch. And there's a little sign there that says Muddy Run, I believe. And there's a driveway just on the other side of that stream. Again, we're at the top of the hill. So you come down past Granite Hill Campground on our way to Fairfield. And you cross this little stream. And you can't really see the old house because there's this huge horse barn blocking the house. But trust me, it is a very old stone house. Joseph Gelback was born in Fairfield. His father, John Gelback, was a Napoleonic War veteran in the Prussian army and is a resident of Fairfield. And his father lives in Fairfield. Gelback also started a quarry. And that quarry, of course, is right here today, that large quarry near Fairfield. But Joseph Gelback has a son, born in July 1852. So he's 11 years old at the time of the battle. He lived for quite a number of years, moved to Glen Rock. And of course, Dr. Charles Glaudfelter, our former historian here, is from Glen Rock. So he supplied me with this account. And it's from the Glen Rock item in 1902. And it talks about John Gelback, who 39 years ago heard the cannons at Gettysburg boom. Mr. Gelback's father at the time lived only 7 miles from the battlefield. Every pane of glass in the house was broken by the jars caused by the terrific shot. Again, his house is in between the 2 artillery batteries that dueled for a time there at the edge of Fairfield. The retreating Confederate Army passed Mr. Gelback's home, and General Lee, General Beauregard, General Longstreet, and General Ewell dismounted and entered the house. Mr. Gelback, then a small boy, remembers that General Lee took him in his arms and placed him upon the knee and asked him whether he thought he would like to be a soldier one day. I'm sure Lee had time to do that. Mr. Gelback thinks that he replied he didn't know. Soon after that, the distinguished generals had entered the house. A Union battery opened fire upon the retreating soldiers, and they joined in a retreat. Mr. Gelback remembers the great general that caressed him as a very tall man with a kindly look and very handsome appearance. I believe that account. You know why I believe that account? Because he mentions General Beauregard was there. And obviously, General Beauregard is near Richmond, I think, at that time. General Beauregard cannot possibly have been there. And you know why I believe that? Because it's such a blatant mistake. He's telling the truth. I always look for that. If someone writes an account of the battle and they're accurate and they get everything exactly right, I'm skeptical. When you talk about General Beauregard in your account, I'm believing every word you say. Because your memory is really faulty. I love that. And then, of course, where would we be if we didn't talk about Abraham Hill McCreary? Abraham Hill McCreary lived in this house in the middle of Fairfield. And his wife, Martha, is pregnant at the time. And according to the family story that appears in the newspaper years later, the family's huddled in the basement as artillery shells are dropping around in the edge of Fairfield. And she goes into labor and gives birth to a child in the basement of the house. The child is named William Sedgwick McCreary, named after the general that had ordered the artillery shells to be fired. Now, according to the tombstone, he's born on July 4th, 1863, and not July 5th, 1863. So I hope they're just wrong about that, because that would really ruin the story. He would be a day old instead of born during the moment of the artillery bombardment. But wow, what a story, don't you think? Now, I mentioned a couple things. I want to mention a couple things about Fairfield. Fairfield is like the most hotly contested town in Adams County during the Civil War. And I think if we use like the Winchester, Virginia method of arithmetic, that's an inside joke. I think Fairfield changed his hands like 11 times during the Civil War. But, you know, in 1862, Jeb Stewart passed through the town of Fairfield. On July 21st, there's a skirmish at Monterey Pass, not too far from Fairfield. On June 28th, there was a skirmish at Fountaindale, not too far west Fairfield, between elements of a command sent forward from Frederick, Maryland by General French and Confederate cavalry who were gathering horses. On June 29th, there's shots fired between Mississippi soldiers and General John Buford's command, and also probably elements of Copeland's Michigan Cavalry Brigade that were passing through. On June 30th, Buford, when he came over the mountains, got into a skirmish with the same Mississippi soldiers. On July 3rd, of course, there was fighting along the tracked road between Fairfield and Ortana, which included the 6th United States Cavalry and the 6th Virginia Jones's Brigade, and there were like 300 casualties if you include all the captured in that battle. And we mentioned on July 5th, there's the New Jersey Brigade and the 26th Georgia. Oh, and on the evening of July 4th, out near Monterey Pass, there's fighting. And on July 6th, we're going to talk about there's another action against the Confederate rear guard. So there's a lot of different action that occurred in and around Fairfield during the campaign. And I have this map in my show, and I made this for an article that I did. I think we still sell it as a magazine downstairs, but it's an issue on the history of the town of Fairfield, and I have lots of stories in it associated with Fairfield during the Civil War. In 1900, we have a great article in our paper where the postmaster of the town is sent a letter by a Confederate soldier from North Carolina who, during the retreat, actually stole some stuff from a store in Fairfield and felt really bad about it. So I think it says, is that 37 years later, he sent $15 to the postmaster, described the store he stole the item from, and wanted him to take the money to the store and pay for the stuff that he stole. I should mention that it would be on the early evening or evening of July 4th, late evening, and then, of course, all day long, morning and afternoon on July 5th, the Southern Army were coming into the town. According to Frank Moore, who was the postmaster, for 24 hours, soldiers poured through the village, as well as horsemen, wagons, and cannon. And all the while the rain poured down on them. Whilst the morning of the 5th came, they were gone, with the exception of some stragglers who were to be found in the wake of all moving armies. And actually, it would be they'd go through Fairfield from maybe from 11 p.m. on the 4th until like 5 depending on how you count, 6 o'clock on the evening of the 5th. So, Fairfield is quite active. And remember, on July 3rd, the 6th United States Cavalry had become embroiled in a violent cavalry action along the Carroll's Tract Road, and Samuel Starr was actually wounded and stayed at the house there in the town. And there's a plaque on that particular house. And I had written down the name of the house. It's not, McGinley House. Okay. And of course the Fairfield Inn, the Fairfield Inn applied for a historical, not a historical society market, a National Trust recognition, and they filled out an application form, and they had all kinds of stories about that house and the retreat. And I actually do put them in the Fairfield book, not that I believe any of them, but apparently they make a huge pot of bean soup for all the soldiers as they go by. Now, one thing about this, so it seems to me that General Sedgwick, just pushes the Confederate retreat, and they retreat through Fairfield, and then he pulls back and just lets them go through the town, and they end up camping on the other side of the town of Fairfield, the rear guard. And then, of course, Warren and Sedgwick have some conference with General Meade, and General Meade's like, I want you to force that, see what kind of force that is. So attack tomorrow, and see what's going on, push the gap. And again, on the morning of the 6th, it's not a very diligent pursuit. But here's the area I wanted to talk about from Fairfield. And here is the intersection of Iron Springs Road and, of course, Jack's Mountain Road, and, of course, the Fairfield Road. The road that goes down towards Zorra is over here. And then, of course, we get to, 16, the road between Emmitsburg and Waynesboro down here. This is partly a map of Hamilton Devon Township. And these two roads, the Iron Springs Road and Jack's Mountain Road, of course, go around Jack's Mountain. And yes, it's called Jack's Mountain. A guy named John Jack had a tavern there in the early 1800s. But on the morning of July 6th, Sedgwick's men come through Fairfield, and it's Thomas Neal's brigade in front. And they move out this road towards the gap on what we refer to today as Iron Springs Road. And remember, it's called Iron Springs Road. On this map, here's the ruins of Mariah Furnace, the Iron Springs, which is just across the street from what we call today Zoo Road, if you know where Zoo Road goes in. This farm here, Reed and the quarry, and I kind of really place them more out here. There's a small engagement. Now, so on the morning of the 6th, Rhodes' division became the rear guard. And I think both armies are really good at this, switching the units that are in the front lines. And Junius Daniel's brigade was sent out to face off against the advancing 6th Corps. Daniel threw out a long line of skirmishers and soon engaged the enemy. Dole's brigade was ordered to support him. According to the account, the 45th North Carolina, under the command of Captain Hopkins, was ordered to occupy a hill some distance to the left and front. I kind of think it's the right and front, but that's all right. Which was thought from the movements of the enemy to be their intention to occupy that with artillery, and from which they could annoy us or withdraw by firing artillery into the gap. Upon reaching the hill, Captain Hopkins found it occupied by a regiment of the enemy who demanded of him to surrender, and to which demand he replied handsomely by driving them beyond the hill with slight loss to himself and considerable loss, he thinks, to the enemy. That's something you see in the official reports all the time, that they inflicted heavy losses on the enemy. And then you look at the losses of the enemy, and they're not that heavy. In his official report of the battle, the 45th North Carolina's commander reported to the rear and to the right of the road. That's why I say, if you go out along the Iron Springs Road from Fairfield and you get towards the mountain gap to your left, there's a little rise of ground. And I think this is where this fight takes place. Following the action, this is just a small action, the 6th Corps reverses course. By that time, General Meade had enough and ordered Sedgwick back to the area of Emmitsburg. But Neal's brigade would just sit there and then the next day pursue the Southern Army up the Iron Springs Road and over and through Monterey as a force to follow the Southerners directly. Now this is what's real. I meant to put another image of this in there and I didn't. But what's really interesting is we have a civilian account here. And it's from the Joseph Reed farm where this battle took place. And also in our museum, we have a flag on display. It is a weird looking flag that was thrown together and sewn by the family at the last moment when the Southern Army were retreating, and he put it in front of their house to kind of symbolize that they were Southern sympathizers and that would help them so the Southerners wouldn't destroy their property. It didn't work. But we have that flag on display. And we have this civilian account from someone in that family. A division of Lee's army encamped at the Reed farm on Saturday, July 4th, and Sunday, July 5th, after the battle as they retreated from Gettysburg to cross the Potomac. On Monday morning, the 6th, Hill's Corps pursuing the rebels. He's kind of getting that mixed up. Again, if you're getting your account mixed up, I believe you. Hill's Corps, Sedgwick's, pursuing the rebels, overtook them at the farm, and a skirmish ensued in which several were wounded. The Union men took refuge behind the house and the trees in the orchard and opened fire on the rebels who lined up on the hill in front of the house. Again, it would be the hill across the road. Mr. Williams, one of the wounded rebels, was carried in the yard and died there and was buried with a comrade, I think by the name of Cox, on the hill across the road. They were afterwards removed. Mr. Quate had his leg amputated in the front yard and was later taken to a hospital in Fairfield. And sure enough, this information in this letter can be confirmed by the burial list of John W.C. O'Neill, who indicates that 2 Confederate soldiers were buried on the Reed farm near Fairfield. Sergeant William A. Williams of Company I, 45th North Carolina, and Henry C. Cox, Company F, 2nd North Carolina Battalion. In 1871, both of these bodies were removed to Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh, North Carolina. So this civilian account has the actual right names of the people. And they were removed in 1871. We don't have any idea where this person got this information from. Maybe it was one of the kids that lived there giving the information. And you see where it says, or you hear how it says Mr. Quate had his leg amputated in the yard? Richard Quate, Quate, of Company C, 45th North Carolina, is listed as being a patient at the West Building Hospital in Baltimore after the battle in the surgical history of the Civil War. I'm just amazed by the accuracy of this account. And here's the number one reason I can tell you it's accurate. Fearing the house would be shelled, the family was ordered to leave. All except grandfather and one son remained with him. General Posey and his staff dined with them. if you're going to brag about a Confederate soldier being in your house, I would not pick Carnot Posey. That's great. General Posey ate in their house. Okay. So, when we talk about the retreat either whether it be the beginning of the retreat route or the end of the retreat route, we're talking about these roads in Adams and Franklin County. And we're talking about, the Iron Springs Road, or we're talking about the Jacks Mountain Road, or the road, the modern 116 that goes down to Zorra and over, 16, which leads between Emmitsburg and Fairfield. And these are all, today, almost original roads. Here's Liberty Township from the 1872 map. There's a bunch of accounts that suggest that part of the Southern Army was sent all the way down the Fairfield Road to the area of Zorra, Emmitsburg being here, and then sent across the Waynesboro Pike. I just don't think that that's practical, because on July 3rd and July 4th, Union cavalry had gotten to the Emmitsburg area and raided into the rear of the Southern Army. So I don't really know that they would have taken that chance. In my estimation, 35 to 40,000 Confederate soldiers would have retreated up the Iron Springs Road, sometimes called the Old Furnace Road, and into the area of the Monterey Gap. Confusing us today when we talk about this fight is modern 116 not being on the same course as old 16. And I don't know if you guys ever go across 16 and right before you get to Fountaindale, there's a sign, the Sunshine Trail. You ever see that? I don't know why they call it the Sunshine Trail. But this is a 1939 map, and it shows the original road and how it wound around, and the modern road, how it has these real nice, gentle curves. So if you're going to do something really fun, if you haven't done this, you have to do this. When you ride from like the area of Jacks Mountain Road, or from the 116 across 16 towards Waynesboro, when you get to Fountaindale, instead of driving straight up the mountain over to Blue Ridge Summit, make a right and take the original old road up and over the mountain. Yeah, and hopefully your car won't break down. That is the route that these soldiers crossed over to get to Monterey Gap, the Union Army specifically. And one problem that we have when we're drawing this on maps and stuff is that the Adams-Franklin County line and the maps, the way they're drawn for the most part, separate these two areas. So someone drawing a battle map has to try to put several different maps of the roads together. And it's made for creative and interesting map work. But here's one done again by my friend Dave Richards for one of the retreat seminars we were doing it. But basically what happens now, I'm going back a couple days because we were just talking about July 6th. Now we're talking about July 4th. So the actions I just talked about occurred at the rear of the Southern column as the Southern Army is retreating and the Northern Army is pushing against them. Well, now we're talking about the beginning of the retreat on July 4th. Remember I mentioned General Ewell had a wagon train, and it was filled with wounded and booty that they captured from south central Pennsylvania. Well, they're traveling along this road up and over the Monterey Gap. And again, this is basically the Iron Springs Road, and then leads over through to Monterey. And Judson Kilpatrick is sent by Alfred Pleasonton under the direction of General Meade to the Emmitsburg area to get in rear of the retreating Confederates and maybe harass the Confederate soldiers. And when he gets to Emmitsburg, he learns from civilians in the area that there is a wagon train that's passing up and over the mountain through this area. And it's protected, it's lightly guarded by Southern cavalrymen. So on the evening of July 4th, he heads out 16 from Emmitsburg over the road past Zorra and Fountaindale, and then up into the area of Monterey along this windy road. There's a detachment of the Southern cavalry that, because of the narrow road and because it winds up through this pass, they were able to hold them back somewhat, but eventually broke through. And about midnight, Kilpatrick's force, led by George Armstrong Custer, cuts into the Confederate wagon train and captures Monterey Pass. Oh my. This is the moment that we've all been waiting for. The Union cavalry has cut off Robert E. Lee's route of retreat. Now, all they have to do is take their couple thousand men and put them in the mountain pass and block it. You know, like Thermopylae. A small force can hold back the whole Southern army here. And Lee would be trapped. And now if Sedgwick would actually attack, we can do something here. We have Lee trapped. What's Lee going to do if he's trapped? But instead of staying in the pass and, dare I say, absorbing some casualties, they ride away. And you know, a lot is made of the Battle of Monterey Pass by cavalry aficionados. But it ends up just being just kind of a footnote. They roll some wagon trains down the side of the hill. They capture some wagons, but they end up riding through the wagon train all the way to Rouserville, and they end up at the next day at Smithsburg. Meanwhile, Jeb Stewart, the next morning, reaches Emmitsburg, learns that he was supposed to be protecting the flank of the Confederate Army, and he let Kilpatrick slip through. He ends up riding to Smithsburg, and at Smithsburg in Maryland, you know, Kilpatrick and I should say Jeb Stewart get into another battle the next day. But one can only imagine the spectacle of this battle at Monterey Pass in the middle of the night on July 4th, early morning hours of July 5th, in the middle of a lightning storm in this narrow road through the pass. And it is just dramatic if you go there. Again, here's from Wikipedia. This is the map on there. Hal Jefferson, I think, did this one. And again, you know, this is all based on our conjecture of exactly what is happening. But I think he did a great job. You see Fairfield and Iron Springs, and you see the roads here. I don't know where, I'm going to show you where you got that name. But, and how this road comes into where Kilpatrick came through. That's a great illustration of it. And now I want to show you that one thing I've tried to bring to the table for these people that are retreat aficionados is that we at the Historical Society have this awesome map. This is actually two large maps I put together of the area from Fairfield through the pass to Waynesboro. And we just have the map. It's just an awesome map. Here at the end, I'll show you just a few details on the map. But it is, altogether, these are two sections of it. There are like 8 sections of it. It was made in the early 1870s, and it shows the South Mountain Range from the Maryland border up towards Carlisle. And it shows roads and streams and features on it that just are not in any other source, and it is very nice. I originally, in our museum, had this as soon as you walked in. I had this large map of the South Mountain Range with some photographs of different features that were associated on the map. But then we went with my Devil's Den wall instead. I can never say no to Devil's Den. So, I had a lot of things in the museum originally that I think I had twice as much stuff in there than there now, but that's all right. That's how it works. There's this article that goes along with the survey in our newspaper, and I had this on there, but it tells you how the elevation of sites along the South Mountain Range, mostly north of Route 30 and a little south of Route 30. So in case you have, a place you want to know how high it is, there you go. Highest point on the Chambersburg Turnpike east of Newman's. Newman's would be where some of us call it TikTok. Grafensburg, Caledonia Furnace. I love it. The Widow Brooks Tavern near Hilltown. Orange Mill up above Orangeville, so you get an idea. Caledonia, yeah, I just love that. Now, there's a lot of trees grown up along the Iron Springs Road or the Old Furnace Road between Fairfield and what we call Monterey. But here is a postcard from my collection, of course, from the balcony of the Monterey House looking towards Fairfield. So we are looking down across the gap. All this is wooded today, so you don't have exactly the same view. And I believe this is like Ski Liberty, and we're looking down through the gap and out towards the open area beyond it. And this is also the road, one of the roads in which General Buford's cavalry came down would it be June 30th, June 29th, June 30th. Let's see. And I have somewhere in here, I swear I have it. Okay, I lost it there. I have an account. Oh, here it is, from a visitor. So this is an account from a visitor from 1867. From the elevation, I speak from personal knowledge, just below the Monterey House, on the summit of South Mountain, but at the commencement of the descent to the east, about 16 miles from Gettysburg, the view of the flat lands extending towards the Susquehanna as far as the eye can reach is magnificent in the extreme, but particularly so from the manner in which it opens out through and from the ravine. I have seen few views in Italy which exceed it in romantic beauty. Maybe it's a little exaggerated. I love it. So, and here is my drawing from the 1870s, which we have here, the original, at the Adams County Historical Society, of the Monterey House, which was a resort prior to the Civil War. And if you go up there to Monterey Pass, you can, they have a little museum and you can talk to them about where the Monterey House was. And so that view is taken from one of the balconies here looking towards Gettysburg. Isn't that just awesome? And of course, maybe you know it, maybe you don't, but the Monterey Pass battlefield has put up there, they've cleared an area on top of Monterey Peak, and they put an observation deck up there, so you can go up there today. You can go up anytime you want now, and you can have that view that we're talking about that was unavailable for many, many years after the Monterey House, fell into disrepair. But Gary is standing at that spot. I don't know why I couldn't find a better photograph than that. Good. Now, so, I'm not going to talk about the rest of the retreat after that, but if you drive along the area of southwestern Adams County, there are many sites associated with the things we talked about that you can visit, and there are various plaques along the different sites we talked about. The July 3rd Battle of Fairfield that occurred along the tract road. I just wrote a wayside exhibit for it, and I don't know if it's up yet, but it's here this summer going up, and it'll be at I think it's still the Wartner's Orchard. So is that the Wartner's Orchard? Or is it somebody else's orchard? But it's a big parking lot there, and they have a fruit stand, and we'll have a nice wayside talking about that battle out there too. And if you're really interested in this, what happened to it? I guess I thought I had it in there. I lost it. I had a picture of the Monterey Battlefield Visitor Center. They have done a spectacular job. I was so impressed. You can actually go to the visitor center, learn a little bit about the retreat and the battle that occurred there on the retreat. And then there's a series of paths, not just up to the peak, but you can walk along the original trace of the road where the wagons came over the pass and were attacked by Kilpatrick's force on July 4th. And it's just, it's a really, really nice place to visit. Well, thank you for listening to my program.